Pokédex number 1, the least popular pick for the first Pokemon, but apparently it's the second most popular Pokemon according to this Reddit survey, and somehow third place to Charizard and Gengar in this Kanto Pokemon of the Year poll from 2020. Our boy Bulbasaur scored 13th out of all Pokemon at the time. Impressive. Did you know that up until Gen 7, Bulbasaur was the only dual-typed unevolved starter? Nowadays, the only other Pokemon with this distinction is Rowlet. Bulbasaur is also the only starter line that has the poison type in it, as one of the many grass poison types from Gen 1. Professor Oak calls Bulbasaur the plant Pokemon in red, blue, yellow, and the Japanese equivalents. However, in the English fire red and leaf green only, he calls it the grass Pokemon. Neither of these are Bulbasaur's actual classification. That would be the seed Pokemon, which Bulbasaur shares with its evolutions, and also Sunkern, arguably one of the worst Pokemon of all time. Now, I'm sure you all knew all of that already, so stick with us on the very first episode of SlakDex, where the facts get weirder the deeper we go. Bulbasaur's evolution line evolves at lower levels than Charmanders and Squirtles, starting the trend of grass-type starters evolving to their final stage earlier than their fire and water counterparts, outside of the thick Feraligatr, that is. The only other starter first partner Pokemon that share the same evolution levels as the Bulbasaur family is the Chikorita family, both evolving into their mid-evolution at level 16 and final evolutions at level 32. Bulbasaur can be received as a gift Pokemon in several games, and these are more closely tied to the anime than you might think. Bulbasaur is the first Pokemon that requires a friendship value to be received. In Pokemon Yellow, you must have a friendship level of 147 or higher with your Pikachu in order to receive Bulbasaur from an NPC in Cerulean City. This NPC is actually based on the anime character Melanie. Melanie takes care of a hidden village of weakened Pokemon that Ash's Bulbasaur protected prior to Ash capturing him. She encourages Ash to take the Bulbasaur with him, as the Pokemon Bulbasaur was protecting needed to learn to fend for themselves. This Melanie-inspired gift Bulbasaur remained in the Let's Go games, but the requirement was changed to having 30 Pokemon caught instead of any friendship stat. Ash's Bulbasaur is similar to his Squirtle in that it never evolves past its first stage. However, unlike Squirtle, there was an entire anime episode about Bulbasaur partaking in an evolution ceremony with other Bulbasaurs. Bulbasaur is pressured by all the other, now Ivysaur, to evolve, but it stands his ground and is eventually respected by them for his decision. And of course, it uses Solar Beam to send Team Rocket blasting off. In this episode, titled Bulbasaur's Mysterious Garden, Ash's Pokédex also tells him that Solar Beam is Bulbasaur's most powerful attack. In terms of raw power, this has now been tied with other grass moves like Power Whip and Petal Dance with 120 base power, but outclassed by Leaf Storm, which has a base power of 130. Double Edge is also 120 base power, just like Solar Beam, but despite Bulbasaur being able to learn it in Generation 1, its base power was only 100 at the time. So we can excuse the anime on this one, as they were correct at the time. It didn't get access to Petal Dance until it was an egg move in Generation 2, and Leaf Storm didn't exist until Diamond and Pearl. Speaking of Bulbasaur's moves, there's nothing too crazy to see here, mostly grass and poison type moves. One weird quirk that's not immediately noticeable with the moves, however, and I'm sure a lot of us missed, is how in the first 6 generations, Bulbasaur learned Vine Whip at either level 9 or 10, and Leech Seed at level 7 in every game. In Sun and Moon, however, for some reason instead of learning Leech Seed, it attempts to learn Vine Whip twice, both at level 7 and level 9. This was quickly fixed in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but what a terrible mix-up. Prior to this, Bulbasaur could only have access to Leech Seed in this generation as a transfer move, or if it evolved, as Ivysaur and Venusaur's learned sets still had the move. It seems crazy with how integral of a move Leech Seed is to Bulbasaur's moveset. In Sword and Shield Onward, it learns Leech Seed at level 9 now instead, and Vine Whip comes earlier at level 3. To this day, Bulbasaur hasn't been able to learn Bide or Rage since Generation 1 TMs. This may not be surprising due to these being less than stellar moves that don't lend themselves to being moves you'd think of a Bulbasaur using or whatever. However, more surprisingly, Bulbasaur has only been able to learn Mega Drain in Gens 1 and 7, and that's Let's Go specifically, as these were the only times Mega Drain was available as a TM. This one seems more useful, as going straight from Absorb to Giga Drain is kinda crazy. Also, it's cool that Bulbasaur gets access to Sunny Day to activate its hidden ability, Chlorophyll, which will boost its lackluster base 45 speed stat in harsh sunlight. Speaking of lackluster stats, I won't blame the little boy because it is a first partner Pokemon after all, but these stats are nothing to write home about. Out of all Pokemon including forms, Bulbasaur ranks 1014th in HP, 1032nd in attack, 987th in defense, 599th in special attack, 655th in special defense, 909th in speed, and 961st in base stat total. That 65 special attack is surprisingly not bad for a non-evolved Pokemon going up against the whole national dex. That's in the better half of Pokemon. As much as I would have loved for it to get better comparing it to other grass types, which also are mostly lackluster as a whole, it doesn't. Among all grass type Pokemon, through Generation 9 of course, including forms, Bulbasaur ranks 118th in HP, 121st in attack, 123rd in defense, 75th in special attack, 86th in special defense, 99th in speed, and 113th in base stat total. 113th out of 146 qualifying Pokemon in forms is pretty wild. Oh, speaking of wild, players may point to the mountainous area south of the coastal biome in the terrarium of Generation 9 as Bulbasaur's first wild appearance in the series. Or maybe you might even remember those Gen 4 remakes, where you could catch Bulbasaur post-national dex in the Riverbank Cave along with its water starter friends in Squirtle, Totodile, and Mudkip. However, we need to go even further back, as Bulbasaur was also available in the Viridian Forest as part of the Let's Go games, of course. Kind of funny how out of the whole Kanto region, Bulbasaur and Pikachu ended up sharing their location as special spawns. No wonder Gen 6 rehashed this iconic forest. But even that is not technically Bulbasaur's first wild appearance. That distinction comes in Alola, specifically the Ultra games, as Bulbasaur was an island scan Pokemon, making it an available capture on Route 2 once you've earned 100 points scanning QR codes. It'll even know the move grassy terrain. Other than wild locations and the gift locations we mentioned earlier, Bulbasaur can be obtained in Pallet Town in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver after defeating Red. It can also be obtained as one of the 2 extra Kanto starters the player can select from Mustard as their Gigantamax starter for the Isle of Armor DLC in Generation 8. And even in Lumio City as a gift from Professor Sycamore in Generation 6. Which brings us back to the anime. Shauna has a Bulbasaur in the anime, which she received as her first starter, unlike the games where she chooses the Kalos starter that's weak in typing to your own pick. She later evolved this into an Ivysaur. Her starter is based off when Professor Sycamore gives you a second starter pick of Kanto starters in X and Y, one of which can be Bulbasaur. In Generation 3, May caught a Bulbasaur of her own, which had a heart-shaped pattern on her head. She got along well with Ash's Bulbasaur once they were introduced, and was left at Oak's lab to learn from him. Unlike Ash's Bulbasaur, however, we see May's Bulbasaur later on has evolved into Venusaur, as she used her in a contest in Sinnoh. She didn't retain the heart pattern, but has a seed in her plant, like other female Venusaur. Speaking of gender differences, Bulbasaur doesn't have a visual gender difference, but in the Gen 4 Beta Sprite leak, it looked like Bulbasaur was intended to have a female sprite that had larger spots on its face and forehead. Could have been cute if it too had a seed in its bulb. Oh wait, okay, let's talk about that bulb. As stated in several Pokédex entries, Bulbasaur's seed or bulb on its back is directly tied to its growth, and it can go days without eating by using stored energy from the bulb. In Hoenn's Pokédex entry for Bulbasaur, however, it specifically says the seed grows larger from soaking up the sun's rays, which makes one question if Bulbasaur even needs to eat anything at all if it's getting sufficient sunlight. This lines up pretty nicely with its chlorophyll ability as well. But if we look to the anime, we can see that Ash's Bulbasaur eats rather well thanks to Brock. Bulbasaur is often considered the easy path to choose when playing through Kanto, considering its type advantage over Brock and Misty, and resistance to Lieutenant Surge and Erica's electric and grass type gyms respectively. That's an instant upper hand over the first half of the gyms. You'll reach the awkward old guy staring into the Celadon gym before you're worried about your little bulb evolving and being decimated by Sabrina and Blink. Don't make any plans to solo run the game with Bulbasaur, however, as the only HM Bulbasaur can learn in the original Red and Blue games is Cut. Not too useful and kind of a meh normal type attack. Definitely wouldn't pull its own weight. Oh, its weight, of course. Bulbasaur has a weight to height ratio, or BMI as PokemonDB.net calls it, of 141. It's 2 feet 4 inches tall, not like tiny, but definitely not dunking on the Lakers or anything. And it weighs 15.2 pounds. Pounds. Oh, we need to talk about Smash. Even though Markiplier famously led this viral video off with a pass for our guy, Bulbasaur's evolutionary legendary line is the only partner line to have each member appear at least once in the Super Smash Bros. Series. Bulbasaur has been a trophy in both Melee and Brawl. While Ivysaur and Venusaur get more screen time for sure, we'll talk more on this later if this video does well. So give it a like if you've learned something about Bulbasaur so far, because we're just getting into the good stuff. And no, Alolan Raichu does not count as completing the Pikachu line, as Raichu is not present at any time in Smash. You smug little YouTube commenters. Moving on, due to the censor that prevents Pokemon with offensive nicknames being traded on the GTS, a Bulbasaur with an English name could not be traded on the Pokemon Black and White GTS without a nickname, as its name includes a derogatory term that means female pig in German. This wasn't intended, but it was a funny glitch. There's also a glitch in the Gen 4 games that allow you to encounter an invisible or spriteless shiny Bulbasaur. We know this is a Bulbasaur due to the cry when the battle start animation completes. Speaking of Bulbasaur's shiny, we've got a lot to talk about with Pokemon number 1's design, as we should. Despite dinosaur being a part of the English name, Sugimori has confirmed that the Bulbasaur family is actually based off of frogs. Wouldn't a frog be more closely associated with water types than grass types though? Bulbasaur's English name may be an obvious conversation of the plant bulb and dinosaur, but like many other Pokemon, its Japanese name is a pun.
不思議だね
Is a combination of
不思議
meaning strange or mysterious and
だね
standing for seed. The phrase
不思議だね
is a Japanese saying of isn't it strange? A similar naming pun and convention can be seen with its French name.
Bulbasaur
Atsuko Nishida designed Bulbasaur, along with all 3 of the other Kanto starters, and Pikachu. Despite her creating the initial design for many Pokemon, Ken Sugimori is the one who put these ideas into ink with his famous watercolor artwork of all 151 Pokemon. Say what you want, and it's up for debate, but 2017 paleontologists named their bulbous dinosaur discovery Bulbasaurus. They claim it wasn't related to the Pokemon, but I'm not so sure. Pikachurin is another example of a real-life scientific connection to Pokemon, so it's not unheard of, but more on that in another video. It goes without saying, but also Bulbapedia is named after Bulbasaur. Definitely didn't see that one coming, right? Shout out to them for being a source of so many great Pokemon facts for so long. Bulbasaur is Junichi Masuda's favorite starter Pokemon, which is great praise from one of the most influential figures in Pokemon's history. But let's go back to the design for a little bit. Bulbasaur is somewhat inconsistent with its colorization, as its body ranges from a light blue up to a light or bright green, which ends up coming close to its current shiny colors when comparing to some older games. In older Ken Sugimori artwork, it appears to be a strong shade of blue. That being said, Bulbasaur seems to settle on being a blue-leaning teal most of the time, fitting its official model and artwork colors. Bulbasaur's shiny colorization, much like its regular one, has also changed a lot over the years. In Gold, Silver, and Crystal, it appeared a bit more of a golden olive shaded green than the colorization it normally has in that game, which is also a vastly different green from the usual. In Generations 3 through 5, the shiny colorization is vastly different from the regular, as Bulbasaur goes from a teal body with a medium green bulb to a stronger olive green than he had in Gen 2, and his bulb becomes dark green. While the shiny colors were not intentionally changed after this point, like many Pokemon in the transition from Gens 5 to 6, X and Y washed out a lot of the strong colors Bulbasaur had, most notably with its bulb being far less different between regular and shiny than it once was. Bulbasaur is a mostly male species, with 87.5% of all captures being male, with the remaining 12.5% being female. However, in the anime, the gender of Ash Ketchum's Bulbasaur has never actually been stated. Bulbasaur is the 3rd most common Pokemon seen in the anime series, with Meowth being number 2, and I'll bet you never guessed number 1.
It's Pikachu!
It's the very
Ash has owned his Bulbasaur for the 2nd longest out of all of his Pokemon. Of course, the first was Pikachu. He released so many of his earlier Pokemon, but not Bulbasaur. Bulbasaur remains in Pallet Town to watch over fellow Pokemon with Professor Oak. Bulbasaur were voiced by Tara Sands, also the voice of Richie, in English up until the dub's recast, where they were eventually replaced with Michelle Knotts as the voice of all Bulbasaur. Michelle Knotts also voices Jessie, and in Japanese, Bulbasaur are voiced by Megumi Hayashibara, who also happens to be the voice of Jessie. I see what you did there, little Bulby boy. Red in Pokemon Adventures uses a Bulbasaur nicknamed Soar, which acts as the opposite to Green or Blue's Charmander. However, neither of these were their first Pokemon. Red's first Pokemon was a Poliwhirl, and green or blues is a Scyther. Bulbasaur's first TCG card comes from the base set with artwork by Mitsuhiro Arita. Arita has drawn many well-known Pokemon cards over the years, with over 600 in total, but his most well-known ones are base set Charizard and Pikachu. In Pokemon Go, all 3 of the Kanto starters have a different Halloween costume for spawns during that time of year. Bulbasaur's outfit is based on Shedinja of all things. Wonder Guard Bulbasaur, anyone? We've got a Wonder Guard video coming your way, don't worry. Speaking of Pokemon Go, in July of 2016, the Automobile Association of Ireland warned the public that catching a Bulbasaur is worth a potential court appearance and a fine of up to 1,000 euros. They really didn't want you playing Pokemon Go while driving, but no need to single our boy out. While we're talking about Ireland, let's go on a little Bulbasaur world tour, shall we? In 2016, an Australian restaurant called Down and Out created a range of Pokemon-themed burgers, each with their own twist, including one in homage to Bulbasaur. The mouth-watering item had green buns and even facial features. This is some like Pokemon Pretty Patty type stuff. The Pacific island of Niue in Oceania once released a coin with Bulbasaur and the Niue coat of arms on the other side. And in 2014, the Japanese national football team qualified for the World Cup, and Adidas, the official sponsor for the team, formed an agreement with Nintendo to feature Pikachu and 10 other Pokemon as the official mascots of the team. Of course, Bulbasaur is one of these Pokemon. I like to think with those vines, you make a pretty good goalie. In Pokemon Snap, 2 Bulbasaur can be found in the river area. They'll stick their bulbs out of the tree stumps and come out when hit by pest balls. You can also lure a third out with an apple. Bulbasaur makes yet another appearance in new Pokemon Snap, showing up in the forest levels 1, 2, and 3. I would never forgive myself if I didn't mention Bulbasaur's daring dash from Pokepark Wii either. Bulb got his own attraction in the meadow area, and here's to watching this video of a Bonsley absolutely slaying it. Competitively, Bulbasaur doesn't have much history to speak of, other than being a fan favorite pick in some Little Cup tournaments. I would suggest if you're going to use this guy, have it hold an Eviolite. For the Bulbasaur merch highlight, which is something we hope to be able to hunt for every Pokemon like we hunt for their shinies, we had to go with these Bulbasaur slippers. If this video gets 10,000 likes, I will absolutely buy them. And trust me when I say you subscribing to this video makes it way more likely that I'll dive into some more fun Pokemon merch in the future. Well, of course, it's impossible to cover absolutely everything about Bulbasaur in one video. And let me know if you enjoyed this format, because we'd love to follow it up with a Venusaur or Squirtle and eventually a whole lot of the Pokédex. Also, we won't go in order because there are so many interesting Pokemon later on in the decks that we just don't want to wait for. If I missed anything huge, like the best Bulbasaur nicknames or any crazy facts, please let me know in the comments. I'm sure y'all have some great Bulbasaur facts, as Bulbasaur is somehow older than I am. Also, sorry for the lack of uploads over the past few weeks. Hero's been working with his family on Christmas trees, Caden's been at school in Florida, but coming back in 2025. And I just wrapped up my first couple projects as an editor for PM7. If you like shiny Pokemon, be sure to check out my edit of his Generation 4 shiny hunting event. Stay hard and happy hunting. Bring back the sound! Bring back the sound!